Hello and welcome to the second episode of Thinking Clearly with George Tracy. So today I thought we'd have this episode kind of come off something that I've been writing for an essay recently. And I'd like to give a bit of a forewarning. I'm only an undergrad student, so please do take what I say with a decent pinch of salt. And if I am mistaken or misinterpreting anything, please do leave a comment explaining or linking where I've gone wrong. So, that being said, we're going to talk about John Stuart Mill and his concept of experiments in living. So, John Stuart Mill was writing in the late 1800s and had noticed that in the West, on average, the state was giving more and more freedom to individuals, which was great. But he was concerned that there was still something that was preventing what he called human flourishing. This idea is very similar to contemporary self-actualization, where you become who you truly are and not artificially restricted by the confines of society or law or what should be done. So, for example, doing things like creating YouTube videos about philosophy, or some of my friends who are heavily involved in the theatre and performing arts. That would be a good example of us becoming who we are, or human flourishing. And he thought the biggest threat to human flourishing was something that he called conformity. And to Mill, there were two really bad things about conformity. First, it stemmed from someone or something assuming that their judgment is infallible. And secondly, that it then exerts this view onto others. The easiest example Mill gives of what conformity can do outside of a genuine law can be shown in what he says about religion and odium theologicum, which literally translates to theological hatred, and usually referred to the anger and hatred generated by disputes over theology and which God is the true God. He explains that since religion demands commitment to themselves at the expense of all the other mutually incompatible religions, so you can't be 40% Christian and 20% Jewish, and then the remainder of you be Hindu. To be a genuine Christian, Hindu, or Jew, you have to be devout exclusively to that one religion. And most vitally in the case of conformity, that the others not only were different, but wrong. And here's where infallibility comes in. So you assume that your faith is the right one, even though realistically there's no actual evidence to suggest that your religion is more correct than their religion, and it's merely circumstantial. But that's irrelevant to you and likewise them, because you assume that you're right, and therefore you're right, and the others are, like I said, fundamentally wrong. And due to this, and the natural inherent incompatibility of religions, you get an incommensurability of ideas. So Mill points out that Christianity is kind of right in a lot of things, but also conflicting religions are kind of right in a lot of different things. An easy example is that, say, the Eastern religions have a much better understanding of what consciousness is, whereas the Western religions have a much better prescriptive system for legal recognition of individuals. Now, both of these are right, or at least approximately true and useful, but neither of them can be compatible with the other, but we kind of want both. And this is Mill's issue with conformity and infallibility. It's saying that we can't be wrong, and we're 100% right. And Mill's worried that you kind of are never 100% right. And so to act as if you are is just hubristic and self-defeating. And for a very similar reason, he also thought that having officially recognised state religions was a terrible idea. Because he thought that fundamentally, choices of faith should be left to be decided by the individual, and not the sovereign on their behalf. And what you get from conformity is the concept that what's best for me is also best for you, which is what Mill hated so much. And he thought that each individual had the best chance of knowing what would be best for himself, even if he may sometimes be wrong. And so again, this is a reason why he thought he didn't want people pushing religion onto others, but this isn't just restricted to religion, it's just an easy example. He comically noted one time that if you can't get clothes or shoes to fit you perfectly unless you get them custom made, then he satirically asked, quote, "Are human beings more alike one another in their whole physical and spiritual conformation than in the shape of their feet?" End quote. So here he's showing that if we can't just assign one shoe that fits everyone to everyone, and it even be remotely comparable, let alone better than allowing everyone to buy the shoe that fits them, how can we do it in terms of what people should own or what they should do with their time? Say, for example, I have friends who really like football, and I don't enjoy watching football at all. But if there were some benevolent overlord, they would tell us that football is 0.6 good, so we should watch that much football. As opposed to my friend choosing to watch it all the time and live on FIFA, and me doing literally anything but that because it sounds like hell. So now everyone kind of agrees with these intuitions that we should be left to our own devices, especially with regards to things that we now widely accept that the state has no right to meddle in. Yet even at Mill's time of writing, thought it did, such as the illegality of homosexuality. And as a quick side note, Mill was unfathomably progressive for his time as a writer, supporting the rights of women and the decriminalisation of homosexuality far before it was intellectually acceptable, let alone canon, to do so. But what Mill wanted most of all was a formal answer for when the state, or society itself, can and is justified to intervene with an individual's actions. And he settled on his liberty principle, which I can best show with this quote. "The individual is not accountable to society for his actions, insofar as this concerns the interests of no person but himself." Now this tends to get read one of two ways, and depends on how you interpret the term interests. And I think it's quite a common mistake for people to assume that Mill meant genuine interests of, such as, I'm interested in having your money, so if you don't give it to me, then you're affronting my interests. But that's not what Mill meant, and luckily he was anything but vague on this topic, and goes on to explain exactly what he meant. Specifically, rights-based interests, such as physically injuring people or stealing from them. So, if I were to steal money from you, I would obviously be affronting your interests directly. But if my unknown relative to me writes me out of the will, although this would be against my interests, because obviously I'd like the free money, I don't think anyone would turn it down, she wouldn't be affronting any rights to me. She wouldn't be breaking my interests in the million sense. It would merely be upsetting me in a sense. And he thought that provided you weren't a child and were safe of mind, Mill wanted you to basically be able to do anything you wanted, provided that you don't hurt others. And for this to be completely safe from taboo and social judgment. He thought that allowing everyone this freedom would allow everyone to become the most themselves version of themselves. And this would unlock the potential for everyone to live how they see fit, which he romantically dubbed the term experiments in living. And he thought that then you could draw an analogy of each individual life has the complete autonomy to live how they want and act with and on their own body how they see fit. And essentially, just to see how things turned out. And you could watch others and benefit from their actions. So, likewise, I can't stop or berate someone for living the life of a yogi or an investment banker, but I can benefit from seeing how their lives go and benefit from their wisdom. And Mill claimed, quote, "Mankind are greater gainers by suffering each other to live as seems good to themselves than by compelling each to live as seems good to the rest." End quote. And this is what Mill wanted. He wanted us to have the utmost individuality so we could become who we are and to enable as much human flourishing as was possible. As well as this newfound liberty benefiting everyone, even those who don't take it, because you can still learn from how other people lived their experiment of life. And I think everyone kind of agrees to this. It feels intuitively true to dress up in a poorly rendered Joker mask and say, "We live in a society. We need to stop society." But Mill's restrictions on when we can interact with others and restrict their views feels really nice prima facie of, you can do whatever you want, no one's allowed to stop you provided you don't hurt anyone else. There are some provisos which I will go over. So he said that just because you're allowed to do what you want doesn't let you out of the contracts that you've agreed to, whether explicitly, such as agreeing to pay your mortgage, or more interesting, he also included implicit contracts. So in one example he gives, he said that if you wanted to go and spend all your money on drugs and gambling and drinking, and you had no money left for the rest of the month, and then because of that, you couldn't afford to care for and provide for your family, then you're breaking your contract to your family. And so you can be justifiably forcibly put to work to pay for this. But what's really interesting is Mill stresses explicitly in this passage that just because he can't pay for his family doesn't make the actions of drinking or gambling or smoking or whatever he spent his money on wrong. The only thing that is wrong is that he couldn't pay for the contracts that he'd agreed to, such as having his family. And that's a really interesting delineation, which feels kind of true. And we do get parodies of this in common law. So, for example, it's not illegal to be drunk, nor is it illegal to just drive a car, provided you have a license. But it is specifically illegal to drive a car while drunk. And this kind of plays off Mill's ideas of you're allowed to get drunk and you're allowed to drive a car, but you're breaking the contract that you've agreed to about driving if you do so while drunk. But that doesn't make being drunk in itself wrong. The problem you get with Mill's experiments in living, however, is that they are just too demanding. And I think, even from a libertarian perspective, Mill fundamentally misses how intricately interwoven our lives are with each other. So he kind of takes for granted that we can just live however we want aside from other people and basically just use them as means of exchange and all live in our own little boxes. Which feels fine in an age of a new frontier and essentially endless land that you can colonize. But living in a city, that's really not how it works, or even just a village or town. So, for example, if you're not allowed to change anyone's actions unless they're directly affronting your rights-based interests, what happens if someone's playing music really loud at 3 a.m. in the house next to you and you've got work in the morning? Well, Mill says, they're not hurting you, so leave them be, let them get on with it. But that doesn't feel right, because it feels like you've got an artificial all or nothing dichotomy, whereas there should be a kind of gradation of social interaction, which I think he does try to account for with his affordance to free association. So, for example, if the person next door to you is always rude and playing music loud at 3 a.m. and you can't sleep, then you don't have to be friends with them. But the problem is, you're also not allowed to kind of create a taboo about playing music at 3 a.m, despite it genuinely affecting you, albeit not affecting your rights-based interests. And aside from the practicality of the annoying neighbour, a worse one is how he demands you have to act around your friends. So, for example, say you had a friend who you could see was on the pathway to becoming an addict, and you could see it was going to destroy his life. Now, Mill says you can talk to him, you can try and persuade him and show him that becoming an addict is not a good way to live his life. But for Mill, provided he's not hurting anyone else, you can't stop him. And you're not allowed to stop him, moreover. And this is somewhere where it feels kind of weird. Likewise, if one of your friends tried to jump off a bridge, then I'd assume most of us would probably try to stop them. But Mill says, no, you can't. Provided they're safe of mind, and they know what they're doing, let them jump, Mill says. And I don't know if that's right or not. And so I'll leave that up to you guys in the comments. So please, comment down below if you think that you should have the right to jump off a bridge, provided you have safe mind and know what you're doing, or not. And that your friends shouldn't be able to forcibly stop you. They could obviously ask you not to, but they can't grab you and pull you back from the ledge. They just have to watch and hope you don't. So, thank you very much for listening. Cheers.